Japan, we love you. Konnichiwa. Plane for Change, love you. Ich ni son chi go look nana. This is for you, from us.
Oh, yeah, my darling, stand by me. No matter who you are, no matter where you go in life, you're gonna need somebody to stand by you. No matter how much money you got, how powerful you can be, you're gonna need somebody to stand by you. Right?
When the night has come, land dark, and that moon is the only light we see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't shed one tear just as long you people come and stand by me. Come on, everybody, and stand by me. Come and stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me.
Oh, when that sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, all the mountains should crumble into the sea. Well, I won't cry. I won't cry. No, I won't shed one tear just as long as you stay by me. Oh, stand by me, baby. Won't you stand by me? Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Come on and stand by me.
Japan,
it's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright.
It's gonna be alright.
Be alright. Be alright.
We don't want y'all to worry.
Be alright.
New Orleans had
Be alright.
a tragedy, even other places too.
Be alright.
And the water's rising, but everything is gonna be alright.
Be alright. Be alright. It's gonna be alright.
It's gonna be alright.
Be
Felix here. Stand by me.
Welcome, everyone, to the Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende. This is a place where we can bring our whole selves, be accepted as we are, with love and friendship. My name is Zeesman. I'm on the board, and today I will be your service leader. This is the third of our board-led services, and we have one more next week that I'll tell you about a little later on. After the service, those on Zoom are invited to stay connected and visit with others in the main room for discussion. And if you are visiting, please type your name in the chat box, how you heard of us, where you're from, so we can greet you personally later. Those who are with us at the Allende are invited to join us for coffee, cookies, and conversation after the service. If we have any other visitors here today, would you please stand? I know I have one, Betty. I've met Betty already. I'm sure I have. Hi, Betty. How are you? How do you pronounce your last name, Betty? How do you pronounce your last name? Cuellar. Cuellar. It's Spanish. Oh, well, that's great. Okay, perfect. You're right where you need to be. All right, that's perfect. Thank you, Betty. Oh, I'm sorry. Hello. And you are? Michelle and Mark. Nice to meet you. Lark, yes. Sorry. Thank you. Massachusetts. Great. Okay. We do record our Sunday in-person services. You can find the links to these on our website at UUFSMA.org. While on the website, please check out various events sponsored by the Fellowship and information on how to become a member. And now we'll begin with the opening words, and I will do this with one of our newest members, Beatriz Alanis. Viene, por favor. Hacemos eso. Now we light the chalice as I read words from Nancy Coombs Morgan. We're going to begin with James Luther Adams for this reflection. All relations between persons ought ideally to rest on mutual free consent and not on coercion. We freely choose to enter into relationship with one another. What a precious gift! To feel deeply connected to others with a sense of agency, mutuality, and consent. There is so much in our lives, especially in the last few years, where our sense of control and agency has been largely taken away from us. Yet as we emerge from the horrors of COVID-19 and all the other challenges in our greater world, we can discover and even practice with one another a sense of promise and anticipation of the difference it makes to have loving relationships at the center of our lives. Now we have the words for the covenant on the screen. Are they up there, Diego? Almost. Okay. So I will read them in English, and then Beatriz will read them. No, antes esos. We stand up for this. Thank you, Jürgen, for reminding me. I'm really bad on details, folks. I mean, really. Okay, so let's read the covenant all together. We respect the interdependent web of life and work for a just and peaceful world. We encourage the search for truth and meaning, strive for compassion in our relationships, and seek values that will benefit our lives and the lives of others. This is our covenant. Beatriz, por favor.
Respetamos todos los estilos de vida dentro de su red independiente y trabajamos por un mundo justo y pacífico. Alentamos la búsqueda de la verdad y la comprensión total. Nos esforzamos por mantener compasión en nuestras relaciones y buscamos valores que beneficien nuestras vidas y las vidas de los demás. Este es nuestro convenio.
Gracias, Pisa. We now enter into a very sacred time in our service, a time when members and friends share with our community significant joys, sorrows, and concerns that they are experiencing. For each joy or concern, we light a candle, indicating that thought, that person, that prayer is held by all of us this morning. If you have a joy, sorrow, or concern you would like to be shared in a future service, please email it to the fellowship's minister, Tom Roselio. And if you are on Zoom and wish to share, no, I'm not going to be able to pick up anything. You can pick up something. If Diego picks up something, I'll share it. Okay. So we light our candle as we've done each week for over 2 years, the blue candle, in concern for all civilians and soldiers suffering from the war in Ukraine. And our red candle will make its reappearance next week for all the Palestinians and Israelis suffering from what is going on in the Middle East. Now, I do have a couple of joys and concerns. One of them was a little bit shocking, from Judith Genya. It's good news. Mark and I survived a big car crash that totaled our car on the road to Berkeley. A drunk driver ran a stop sign, hit us right in the front and side. I was dazed and shaken, no brakes or major problems. We are grateful to be alive. It ends well. We send healing, best wishes to Marco Evangelisti, who just had surgery this week and is recovering well. I wrote him a couple of days ago and he responded that he was feeling well, so that's good. And that's all we have for joys and concerns. Do you have anything? Nothing. Okay. And our final candle, one more, is lit for all those joys, concerns, sorrows in our hearts, but not spoken aloud in this room. Please join me in a few moments of silence to allow us to share in these concerns. Okay, during the musical meditation, you may come forward in silence to light a candle of joy and concern. Diego, can we have the music, please? world filled with division and challenges, the theme for this year's Unitarian Universalist General Assembly is a powerful reminder of the core principles that unite us as Unitarian Universalists. The theme is love unites, stories ignite, and celebrates the profound impact of love as a binding force that transcends boundaries and fosters connections within our faith community and beyond. So you may know that there's a rewrite being proposed of our principles. And the principles are being condensed into key words in a circle, and they're all being linked to love at the center, which is why that's the name of today's presentation. And the sermon that's coming up, I hope you enjoy it. You're going to be led into a spiritual practice that you may never even have heard of before, but you might really enjoy doing, and I hope you do. It's called The Spiritual Discipline of Love. Diego, please.
One of the things I like about my job on the UUA's Congregational Life staff, and there are many things I like about this job, is that I don't have to preach every Sunday. Preaching is kind of optional for me, and I'm okay with that. I have enormous respect for my ministerial colleagues who come up with a fresh sermon almost every Sunday morning during the church year, but I'm content to write maybe 3 or 4 sermons a year, tops. This preaching schedule allows me to focus on topics that I feel strongly about. So when one of the small congregations I work with invited me to preach on the topic of our current third principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, I jumped at the chance. I think it would be fair to say that this principle is part of my personal mission statement. Spiritual growth is, I believe, one of the most important reasons for religious communities to exist. So I find it interesting that the third principle is the only place in our current 7 principles where the word spiritual is mentioned. The word spirit or spiritual are mentioned 4 times in the sources of our living tradition, but in the 7 principles, that's it. 1 time and number 3. I find that interesting, but not surprising. When I first became acquainted with Unitarian Universalism in the 1990s, spirituality was a bit of a controversial subject. Many UUs, for many of them, the dominant theological perspective was humanist in nature. Atheists, agnostics, and religious humanists probably made up a majority of UUs at the time. Consider this. In a 1997 Unitarian Universalism Needs and Aspirations survey that was distributed in an issue of the UU World, respondents were asked to please check the one of the following which best describes your theological perspective. Here are the results. Humanists, 41.6%. Earth/nature-centered, 19%. Theist, 13%. Christian, 9.5%. Mystic, 6.2%. Buddhist, 3.6%. Jewish, 1.3%. Hindu, 0.4%. Muslim, 0.1%. Other, 13.3%. Of the 10 choices, humanist was the winner. That same year, I was the director of religious education at a mid-sized congregation in a Midwestern college town, and I remember hearing a story about a long-time UU wondering, what's all this spirituality stuff people are talking about? And there were several friends and members I knew who wanted to find ways to deepen their spirituality, but felt they needed to co-affiliate with other religious groups in order to do that. So even though spirituality was and is part of our principles and purposes, it hasn't always been, shall we say, appreciated. It's been overshadowed, perhaps, by other principles that could be interpreted in a more humanist way: the inherent worth and dignity of every person, the interdependent web of all existence. But interest in spirituality was growing in the late 90s. In that same survey, respondents were also asked, have you ever considered leaving UUism? If so, why? 40.6% answered no, 59.4% answered yes, and here were their most important reasons why. Lack of spirituality, warmth, and joy, 29.2%. Congregational conflict, 24.3%. Too arrogant and cerebral, 19.2%. Too much political correctness, 19%. Lack of commitment to fighting oppression, lack of diversity, 11.6%. And too much spirituality, 8.6%. I could see the growing interest in spirituality as a director of religious education. I remember one item from a REACH packet I received from the UUA's RE department. REACH, by the way, stood for Religious Education Action Clearinghouse. Those packets were a pre-World Wide Web way of keeping religious educators up to date with the latest RE resources. In one packet, there was an item from Judith Frediani, who was part of the RE department at the UUA, that outlined an adult religious education experience based on Barry Andrews' article, The Roots of Unitarian Universalist Spirituality in New England Transcendentalism. I remember being so intrigued by that article and the thought that there was such a thing as Unitarian Universalist spirituality. I honestly hadn't heard anything like that before. By the end of that decade and century and millennium, the subject of spirituality was being addressed more and more in congregations and the UUA. This book, Everyday Spiritual Practice, Simple Pathways for Enriching Your Life, was published by Skinner House Books in 1999. It was one of the first UU books to directly address spirituality that I'm aware of. There were 4 essays in it that really influenced me. Arvid Strauby's Spiritual Maintenance Schedule, Edward C. Lynn's Sacred Moment, Laurel Holman's Living by Heart, and Eric Walker Wickstrom's Prayer. I'll note that 3 of these authors were some of the first UU ministers to be trained as spiritual directors. There were only a handful of them at the time. This book was published 1 year into my 4-year seminary training at Meadville Lombard Theological School. Of course, one book wasn't going to change the seminary's curriculum, but some of my fellow students and I did advocate for more opportunities to learn about spiritual practices. In order to do that, the faculty had to bring in some spiritual directors from Calvert House in Hyde Park, a Roman Catholic mission to students, faculty, and staff at the University of Chicago. By the middle of the first decade of this century, however, the importance of attending to the spiritual lives of Unitarian Universalists was becoming more prominent. In 2006, the UUA's Commission on Appraisal issued a report entitled Engaging Our Theological Diversity that said, the generations coming to maturity today and in the next decades are showing a renewed interest in spirituality. And if we can catch their attention, we can become, again, a prominent and influential religious movement. It is about catching the wave of people hungry for a sense of belonging and meaning, people who want a place where they can safely pursue a spiritual path in the company of people who will support and challenge them, a place that embraces reason, yet transcends the rational and touches the soul. And roughly 10 years later, the UUA bookstore's rather predictable and pedestrian name, UUA Bookstore, was officially changed to In Spirit. And now we're at the point where interest in spirituality is a given in most UU circles and congregations. Many of my colleagues, lay and ordained, have, like me, been trained as spiritual directors, and the UU Spiritual Direction Network lists dozens of UUs who offer spiritual direction. Meadville Lombard's Leadership Institute for Growth, Healing, and Transformation, LIGHT, even has its own spiritual direction formation and certification program. And in 2018, a follow-up to 1999's Everyday Spiritual Practice was published by Skinner House Books, called Faithful Practices, Everyday Ways to Feed Your Spirit. This is all good news as far as I'm concerned. Pretty impressive, actually, given that spirituality is mentioned just that one time in our principles. Now, as you may have heard, the UUA is currently in the process of revising the section of its bylaws that contains the principles and purposes. And it's no surprise to me that given our association's increased emphasis on spirituality, the proposed revisions name it more than once. The words spirit, spiritual, and spiritually are mentioned in the Values and Covenant section of the proposed changes. Here's the exact wording. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love with a capital L. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically, and we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. Now, I love the idea of cultivating a spirit of gratitude and hope, but for the purposes of this sermon, I'd like to focus on the first two uses of spiritual and spiritually, because I think they contain something that our current third principle is missing, or at least doesn't emphasize enough, namely that spiritual growth is a collective experience. I don't know about you, but for the longest time, when I thought about spiritual growth, my mind would go to images of monks and nuns and saints fervently praying alone in their chambers. I think I was being influenced by the Bible verse where Jesus says, "When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen." To be honest, this solo take on spirituality fits perfectly with the kind of individualism that our faith, and indeed most forms of Protestantism, promotes. I've heard it referred to as pathological individualism, and it applies not only to religion in America, but to much of our culture as well. So while the third principle affirms and promotes spiritual growth, the word encouragement almost makes it sound like a suggestion, as in, hey, if you're interested in spirituality, go ahead and knock yourself out. Or in the words of a popular phrase from the previous decade, you do you. But let's take a closer look at those proposed revisions to the UUA bylaws. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love, and we covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. We are accountable to one another, and we're here to collectively transform and grow spiritually. What this new language advocates is not just an individual spirituality, but something else, a communal spirituality. I first ran across the concept of communal spirituality in a book called Embodied Spirits, Stories of Spiritual Directors of Colors. It was in a chapter of that book by Sherry Bryant Johnson called Living My Legacy, which details how her experience of the Black church tradition influenced her work as a spiritual director. In the chapter, she quotes theologian Michael Battle, who said, the nature and the beliefs and practices of the Black church can be summed up in the phrase communal spirituality. Now, I'll confess that I don't know a lot. I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with Black churches, but from what I do know, worship in a Black church is in many ways the polar opposite of what happens in most UU congregations, indeed in most white Protestant congregations. Sherry Bryant Johnson does, in fact, apply the concept of communal spirituality to worship. She talks about designing a worshipful environment where individuals can at once journey toward intimacy with God while growing toward deepening connection with others. I would submit that if worship is at the heart of our religious communities, then it is the obvious place for us to practice communal spirituality. There are many things we already do in our worship services that can be transformed into communal spiritual practices. Silence is the most obvious. Many congregations have moments of silence, but they are usually only 1 to 3 minutes long. Silence as a communal spiritual practice could be much longer. Singing can be more meditative. It's one thing to rise in body and or spirit to sing a familiar hymn together with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's another thing altogether to sing a simple melody over and over again without a predetermined stopping place and allowing the congregation to collectively discern when to let the music meld into silence. Readings and meditations may benefit from being heard more than once, as with the practice of Lectio Divina. Lectio Divina is usually used with scripture, reading a short Bible passage multiple times with moments of silence between each repetition. First time through, participants listen for a word, phrase, or image that attracts them. Second time through, listeners name a feeling they may be aware of as they hear the passage. And the third time through, folks open themselves up to whatever invitation they might find. It's a spiritual practice that I found works particularly well with groups. Unitarian Universalists usually use poetry rather than scripture, which is fitting since we don't have a single book of scripture. And as Professor Guillaume Thierry says, poetry appears to be built into us. Every human being is an unconscious poet. So, if you would indulge me, I'd like for us to be brave and embrace the unconscious poet in all of us and give this communal spiritual practice a try. I'm going to read the poem Meeting the Light completely by Jane Hirschfield 3 times. I invite you to listen carefully the first time through for a word, phrase, and or image that catches your attention. Second time, notice any feeling the poem may evoke in you. And third time, pay attention for any invitation the poem may offer. Meeting the light completely. Even the long beloved was once an unrecognized stranger. Just so, the chipped lip of a blue glazed cup, blown field of a yellow curtain, might also, flooding and falling, ruin your heart. A table painted with roses, an empty clothesline. Each time, the found world surprises. That is its nature. And then, what is said by all lovers, what fools we were not to have seen. Meeting the light completely. Even the long beloved was once an unrecognized stranger. Just so, the chipped lip of a blue glazed cup, blown field of a yellow curtain, might also, flooding and falling, ruin your life. A table painted with roses, an empty clothesline. Each time the found world surprises, that is its nature. And then, what is said by all lovers, what fools we were not to have seen. Meeting the light completely. Even the long beloved was once an unrecognized stranger. Just so, the chipped lip of a blue glazed cup, blown field of a yellow curtain, might also, flooding and falling, ruin your heart. A table painted with roses, an empty clothesline. Each time the found world surprises, that is its nature. And then, what is said by all lovers, what fools we were not to have seen. Thank you for giving Lectio Divina a try. Now I'd like to make a modest proposal. At least a few times a year, bring communal spirituality to the foreground when we gather on Sunday mornings. Be more intentional about the silence we share. Rather than singing hymns together, use meditative chants and songs in the style of the Taizé community in France. And practice Lectio Divina as part of any sermon or message, just as we've done today. If we were to do that from time to time throughout the year, we would not only be encouraging spiritual growth in one another, we would be collectively transforming our religious communities spiritually. And where does love fit into all this? Well, the word love is not even mentioned once in our current principles, only mentioned 2 times in our sources. And an omission that is even more peculiar than spiritual being mentioned only once. After all, a report from 1976 by Robert Miller found that UUs were more likely to assert the importance of love than any other group, religious or non-religious. I propose that we use these spiritual services to focus our hearts on love with a capital L. From the readings and meditations we use to the hymns and chants we sing, let love be at the center of those services. Let us publicly and collectively celebrate that our deepest common theological grounding in value is this: love.
Okay. There is one thing I do want to do, though. I'm doing it on the spur of the moment, but I'm going to do it anyways. Got a couple of extra minutes. They talked about poetry. He did mention meditative chant. Now, I used to lead services in another tradition that would do something called the nigun. A nigun is a wordless melody. Now, a nigun is something, its original usually comes from somebody, somewhere. It just comes out of them. And then they sing it over and over again, and then they share it, and other people, if they like it, they share it with them. And in my experience, people really liked my nigun. So I'm going to share my nigun with you right now. Are you ready to sing? Okay, I'll give it to you in little bits. Maybe a kind of music you might not be all that familiar with. You'll catch on pretty quick. Okay? Ready? La 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 la. Congratulations, your first nigun. All right. Now, I'm going to provide the offering words that are from Vanessa Rush Southern. And it's entitled, Even This Is Enough. There's so much undone, and there's so much to do. So much to heal in us and the world. So much to acquire a meal, a healthy body, a fit one, a lover, a job, a better job. Proof we have and are enough. Just around the corner now. And up against it, reality of all that falls short and the limits of today. We honor the limits. If your body won't do what it used to do, for now, let that be enough. If your mind won't stop racing or can't think of the word, let it be enough. If you are here utterly alone and in despair, be all that here with us. If today you cannot sing because your throat hurts or you don't have the heart for music, be silent. When the offering plate goes around, if you don't have money to give or the heart to give, let it pass. The world won't stop spinning on her axis if you don't rise to all occasions today. Love won't cease to flow in your direction. Your heart won't stop beating, and all hope will not be lost. You are part of the plan for this world's salvation. Of that I have no doubt. The world needs its oceans of people striving to be good, to carry us to shores of hope and wash fear from the beachheads and cleanse all the wounds so they can heal. But oceans are big, and I'm sure there are parts that don't feel up to the task of the whole some days. Rest if you must then, like the swimmer lying on her back who floats, or the hawk carried on cushions of air. Rest in pews made to hold weary lives in space carved out for the doing of nothing much but being. Perhaps then you will feel in your bones, in your weary heart, the aching, healing sense that this is enough. Even this, that we are enough, you are enough, enough. For these and all the meditations of our heart, unspoken in this hour, I now say, Amen. And the offering will now be accepted. Before our closing words, I'd like to make one announcement about next week's service. Don't miss it. Jürgen Aller will speak to the hope to establish an intentional, intergenerational, intercultural living collective right here in San Miguel. The idea comes from our long-range planning committee in 2020, and then there will be an opportunity to discuss the issue at Aldea and on Zoom. So I hope to see everybody there. Our closing words are from Phoenix Bell Shelton Biggs. Friends, thank you for your witness to all that exists on the margins. Thank you for your commitment to hold yourselves and one another in great and steadfast love. Moving forward from this space, may we continue to nurture spiritual growth. May we continue to travel along the winding pathway to healing from whatever brokenness we individually and collectively hold, knowing that we do not journey this path alone.
Hey,